Hello, welcome to the Rightist Leftist with Nathan Ogilvie. This is episode 2. Thank you for tuning in. And this video is a build up and adding on to the first video because obviously in that video I explained my background, political philosophy, and that I'm sort of taking that psychological approach to the political issues in Australia. And so this video, titled around the question, "What do I believe?" It's going to be an outlining of the specific issues that are facing everyday Aussies in Australia and my position on them. And at the end, you get a bit of a political compass image and where I compare to the parties. And I know that's a little bit, you're putting yourself in a box by doing that, or it's there might be issues with that, the way that those are calculated, especially within a party. There might be different politicians that believe different things. So it's a sort of a generic overview of what each party believes and how I would stand alongside each of those parties. But I'm doing it for full transparency because if you're going to continue to watch this podcast, or you're going to be, if you want to be interviewed and on the podcast to discuss the political issues, I want to make sure you're fully aware of all the issues that I believe in, the issues that I believe best help everyday Aussies, because really that's my only decision when it comes to making a policy is, does it help everyday Aussies or not? And by everyday Aussies, I mean pretty much, the 99%, anyone that's not ultra wealthy. So again, if you're a homeowner, if you have, one or maybe two investment properties, so you're not um, ultra wealthy in the sense of being a billionaire or multi-billionaire who already has enough money, um, you're a part of this policy decision. Now, we'll get into some of the sticky issues where it can be arguable which way you go on the policy, does that actually help? So we'll go through that with each specific policy. But essentially, as I was saying in my interview um, with Jake, the non-voter, that right now Labor is in power and I will personally benefit on some of their policies, but I don't necessarily vote just for myself. And I know a lot of people do. And if that's you, your only decision is, how does it help me? That's totally fine. And I think that's what I'm trying to get at, is this list of common sense policies that can help the vast majority of everyday Aussies, and therefore they would vote for someone that stands by those policies, is exactly what I'm talking about. And as we'll go through, I'll discuss maybe some of the way the policies are phrased or some of the ideas are presented, how we need more information and to have those conversations about the issues so we can make sure that we're more informed to vote and what the local politicians or the parties actually represent. So in doing that, I'm going to bring up everyone's favorite resource. This is called Vote Compass. It's developed by the ABC. I consider the ABC to be a valid and reliable news source. I know a lot of people say it might be having a bit of a left wing or a Labour bias. I think if you actually um, utilize it as a resource, there are a lot of conservative opinion writers within the ABC. I believe David Spears, who hosts one of their flagship programs, is a well known right wing conservative commentator. So I do think it's actually quite a fair and balanced news source. Now, I know that you may not agree with that, and that's totally fine. But I also think this Vote Compass uh, program, which I've already done once, but I'm going to just do it again for this video, also developed by Vox Pop Labs, is a pretty moderate and fair and balanced idea of the political opinions. I do think some of the wording of the questions is pretty poor, but at least there's the option to give more subtle answers than just yes or no, whether you agree with it or not. And you can also rate how important the issue is to you as well. So it sort of gives a weighting to each issue if you don't care about it, or if it's a super important issue to you, you can also include that in your answers as well. So this is for the 2025 Australian federal election, which is already passed, and the next video will be a bit of a breakdown of that and sort of my suggestions to the parties. Very unsolicited advice, but I'll give it anyway if they want to listen. But let's get started. So just going to put in my postcode. So I'm just going to dox myself for you guys. So yes, I'm in the electorate Latrobe. So now it goes through the 30 policies and then what we think about all the different leaders and things like that. So again, employers should have the right to refuse work calls and emails outside of their working hours. Um, Again, most Aussies are working Aussies. I would also consider this, self-employed if you're working for yourself, and it's outside your working hours. Why would you do work? So I strongly agree with that. Australia should always fly the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flag alongside the Australian flag in official settings. Now, you might have already gathered from my previous discussions, the social issues, I am fairly left on most of those. I'm pretty much the idea of the government should stay out of people's lives. I think the economic issues are much more important. The cost of living affects pretty much every Australian, whereas a lot of these fringe social issues don't really affect that many everyday Aussies in our everyday lives. And the economic issues are much more important. So I put a lot less weight in these social issues. And I also don't like policies, especially the way this is worded in terms of absolute, like should always. Um, I actually really, just on a personal level, I actually like the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags. I just think visually they're very appealing, and I know that they're very important and represent a lot to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. So I actually would, if there was a vote to change the Australian flag to the Aboriginal flag, I would vote for that. I think we need to move away from being a republic and and our connections to Britain, because the Union Jack on the Australian flag represents that. I think as a country, we can move on that. And if there was an option for a third flag that sort of combined our Aboriginal roots with our with the sort of the image of the Australian flag, I'd be all for considering that too. So in that said, I'm a somewhat I'd probably be a neutral, but in terms of the unity between um oh, ad blocker updated, excellent. Don't like those ads. Between uh the unity for purposes of the unity between the two flags and what it represents, I would say somewhat agree. The Australian government should help university graduates pay off their student loans. I have a lot to say on this. It personally affects me. As I said, the Labor's promise to wipe 20% off HECS debt will directly benefit me. But that said, I do recognize that there are a lot of Australians that will go straight into the workforce and not go into university. So, this as a policy, and this is what I'm saying, even though it directly benefits me, it doesn't really actually help everyday Aussies. Now, in a way, it does, because let's say with doctors, psychologists, lawyers, and business people that need degrees to get into whatever their course. So you have to get into that course, and you're going to work in the public sector and help everyday Aussies. So, a lot of doctors that work in public hospitals will have huge student debts. I don't want If I'm going to go to the public system, I don't want to have a nurse or a doctor that's got this saddled with this debt to be in a situation where they've taken a lower salary, because it is a lower salary in the public system than private, to have to be struggling and paying off their loan. Um, they should be able to focus on supporting me and get paid a decent salary for the work that they do. So again, I'm a somewhat agree on that one, for the reason that um, the government, I have a lot more to say on this, so this will be a whole separate video, but I also do think it should be a 50-50 model of funding. I think making students take on all of the debt for the loan is pretty disgusting, because of that reason, that most of those degrees will help um, benefit society. Now, I have a few caveats, because you don't want people to be perpetual students and just study their whole lives and essentially be getting government money to do that. There should be and I think universities have much more accountability to find jobs for students once they graduate, so they're practical degrees and things like that. But I do think the government should provide more support overall, because of the benefit that society does get from well-educated population, in the sense of especially people in the public sector that are helping and taking a lower salary. So I'm a somewhat agree. There should be a limit on how much landlords can raise the rent they charge tenants. Now, I mean, I feel like that should just be a given anyway. You shouldn't just be able to raise rent a certain amount. When I was a previous renter, there was a time when there was a 25% increase on our rent. And look, I'm going to talk to you if you're a landlord too. You know that's crazy. You know that's insane. And you're just trying to get away with it. And that's okay. I mean, it's capitalism. You can try it, but I think the government needs to put limits on that. Now you say what limit? I would say with it, we can talk about that bigger term, and I'd love to talk to some landlords. Come on and let's have a chat. I would say somewhere in terms of wage growth or inflation, which around, if we're looking at the last few years, inflation's been very high. Growth is slowly going up, but it's a bit stagnant. But somewhere between that, let's say between 2 to 5% per year, you've got to keep rent in line with people's wage growth because otherwise we're going to have a portion of the population that are just going to be perpetual renters forever, and they're never going to be able to have a chance to buy their own house. And essentially, if we're talking, I don't mean landlords, I'm okay with one or two investment properties, but if you have five, 10, there's stories online of people with 100 or like whole apartment buildings. Um, you're increasing the rent on everyone 25%. That is rapidly increasing economic inequality, and I don't agree with that. So in this case, I'm a strongly agree. Come fight me. No, don't fight me, but let's talk landlords. Let's have a chat. How much of a role should the private sector have in healthcare? Now, I'm directly, again, related to this because as a psychologist, work in the private sector, and I do provide subsidies for people who are struggling financially as well. I think, though, given what's happening with hospitals, and there's just been a health scope and a hospital system that have gone under, and I believe a lot of those issues are related to privatization of the healthcare. I'm going to say somewhat less. I think there is a role for the private sector, but I think the slow increase of that is doing a lot of harm, and we need to make sure that healthcare is properly publicly funded by the government. I'd always be a much less, but I am going to say somewhat less because I do think, and again, probably I'm going to do a whole video on probably each of these issues. So this is just dipping the toe so we can get through them all. But I'm going to say somewhat less on that one. How much should out of work Australians receive in unemployment benefits? I finally like that it's word is out of work. I hate, things like, I mean, they would never say dole bludgers, but the sort of the stigma of people being on unemployment is that they want to be like that or they want to be perpetually unemployed. It's just not true. The number of people long term on unemployment is very, very low compared to most people that are on it. Most people that are on it have found themselves in a situation where maybe it's due to AI or job cuts or something like that, that they've lost work. And, we all know that even if you have a good job, you know that you need to pay bills. And so that's what our unemployment benefits are for. And I think that the current rate, I know that there's different rates, and depending on your situation, there's not like an exact number for everyone because there's rental assistance and all these different factors. I still think it should be more. I don't think it should be much more. And this is where I sort of do veer from the left who want to really increase it a lot. Totally understand that we need to incentivize people to work, but we don't want to be making people have to make sacrifices like, are they going to eat? Are they going to pay rent, or are they going to not be able to eat that week because they're unemployed? We need to provide for the basics for someone to get back on their feet. Because if they're not going to get back on their feet, if they don't have financial support to get back on their feet, that's what makes people stay unemployed or become homeless. I don't know why. I know this is something I need to talk to a lot of right wingers about because this is probably one of the big issues that stops me from going all the way to supporting the right is that treating people like they're just sitting at home playing games and not engaging in society. It's some of them, but it's just such a small percent. So I'll leave it there and I'll say somewhat more. How much should Australia spend on its military? So again, I mean, I don't want to, again, I don't want to sort of generalize in broad strokes the left and the right, but I think military is much more supported by the right than the left. And I do support the military. I really support the troops. I know from a mental health point of view, the toll working in that field can have on people, and I have great respect for people that do that work. That said, the spending we need to. I know, given the global situation, we don't want to um, cut spending on the military, so I don't want to defund it. But I think especially in America, I think this is the first budget in America where they're going to spend $1 trillion per year on the military, and that's far too much. Australia, we don't spend as much as America, but I'm okay to say about the same. And I think we need to look at where it's more so where the money's spent in terms of the military than how much. But I don't really want to increase it or decrease it. So I'm okay to say about the same. Australia should call for the immediate recognition of a Palestinian state. So I am not, and as you probably gathered too, I'm more of a domestic policy person than foreign policy. I recognize how important international relations and how conflicts overseas, even though they're not on our shores, can affect the Australian situation. But I'm not super informed on those issues, and I would love to talk to people more about those. But I think I'm going to say just because um, I don't know what the benefits of recognizing a Palestinian state versus not. I'm probably going to just even put, I was going to say neutral, but I'm even going to put don't know because that's not my area. How much Australia should do to reduce its carbon emissions? I'm going to say much more. The way that we do it and what we do is all up for debate, whether it's more investment in clean energy or it's taxing the big carbon emitters, or which I always prefer incentivizing people and businesses to invest more in carbon emissions. We do need to do much more. And that just for the environment to benefit everyday Aussies. We want to be breathing clean air and have an earth that we can live on for years into the future, not just, well, not just for our own lifespan. I would like humanity to continue beyond the next couple of, however you argue it, next few decades or hundreds of years. I think we need to really invest in that. How much should wealthier people pay in taxes? I'll do the Jordan Peterson of what do you mean by wealthier? Define the terms. Wealthier, I wouldn't be meaning um, people that are even on like 200,000. For me, I would look at this as ultra wealthy, and I would define that based on a few economic indicators as about $450,000 per year or more. So that's we're talking huge incomes. Also, people with a lot of investments or business, and I mean like big business, multi-million, billions of dollars. Those wealthy people need to pay much more. So someone like Gina Reinhart, who has 30 shipping containers of peanuts, while if we're on $75,000 a year, you get one peanut a year. Or if you're lucky and you're on $150,000 a year, you're doing quite well than most of the population. You're getting two peanuts a year while she's on that 30 shipping containers level of wealth. They need to pay much more. And I think most Aussies agree with that when we're talking about the ultra wealthy. People that have worked hard and all that for their lives, for their income, might be on 200,000. I don't think they should pay more, but the ultra wealthy, definitely. Transgender women should be allowed to compete in women's speed. I don't care. So I think the transgender issue is just a distraction from the economic issues. I know the right wing make a huge deal about it and see it as like the big issue. I see it as a distraction from the real issues. Transgender people, depending on the survey that you look at, it's mostly less than 1% of the population. The last stat I saw was about 0.7% of the population identify as transgender. In my current life right now, I know two transgender people, and it's barely something they even talk about in their own life. It's a non-issue to me. I actually think the government doesn't even really have any role. I think the sporting leagues are the ones that get to decide this. I don't care. Not an important issue to me at all. I think transgender people are everyday Aussies. If you're an adult and you want to decide your identity, the government shouldn't be telling you what you can and can't do. I know people will talk about biological man competing with women. Not an issue to me that I really care about at all. So I'm not for you if that's what you go watch your transgender podcast if that's what you care about. How much power should trade unions have in the workplace? So this is where I divert. I think in the feedback I'm getting or people that I do talk to, I do maybe come across as quite labor coded in terms of being sort of kind of left wing, but right in some ways. I'm a big supporter of unions. I think unions have a strong place to make sure workers have a fair go. But that said, I sort of am in the middle too, because I do believe in individual bargaining as well, because I've done that myself in certain work roles, even though there might be employment agreements and stuff. I always do believe in advocating for yourself and um, individually bargaining, but collective bargaining, especially in huge industries, is very important. And um, I think ultimately businesses actually, and this is what I think I like to talk to business owners about or people that are anti-union. Um, when you have a strong workforce, people that have good benefits, good salaries, good wages, and can support their families, they're less stressed and they're more productive. So, um, in the sense that if businesses actually recognize that and just paid and gave benefits properly, which I, maybe I'm delusional, but those workers would uh, support the business. And then also, there's more money circulating in the economy. When workers have more money, they'll spend more and support businesses. I just don't see why that's not understood. And so, in that way, unions are kind of necessary to have that happen because businesses obviously want to just make profit and pay workers as little as they can. That's the raw capitalism model. But I think that unions do have their place. Look, I would say somewhat more because I think there are some unions like the CFMEU that are quite, there's a lot of corruption and definitely issues at the top. I think it's not the average union member, but that unions in general should have a little bit more power than they do now because there are some like the NTEU, the university unions that are probably growing in numbers, but we have quite fairly low union membership across Australia compared to some of the other, so, like some European countries that have a lot stronger union participation. Yes, I strongly agree. Australia should cut its ties to the monarchy. We should be a republic. A republic. There's a great the Malcolm Turnbull Tony Abbott debate like in the 90s because this was already a referendum. I think I know referendums are annoying because they often fail, so I don't think we should necessarily do one again. But I think if it went to referendum this time, we would cut our ties to the monarchy. You can still respect the Queen and all of that, but Australia, we need to find our own feet as a country and move on from the Great Britain Commonwealth. Australia should build nuclear power plants to generate electricity. So the funny thing with this is I agree with that, but we're too late. All the data that I've seen, the amount of time it takes to build nuclear facilities, the amount of money, we should have done this in the late 90s, early 2000s. It sort of got shot down then. It is a form of clean energy. Arguable about the nuclear waste that it creates. That would be a big issue. But the Liberal Party, this was one of their key policies this election, and they lost, and a big part of it was losing because of this. So, in principle, I agree, but I think we've missed the boat, unfortunately, and we really need to invest in that clean energy. So I'm going to somewhat. So in principle, I do agree with nuclear power, and I do divert from the Greens and other parties because of that. Um, and I did somewhat disagree. The only thing I would add if we were going to move forward with this is I would demand head offices where the CEOs and executives of those companies they have to be going to their office at the facility. So that you watch the safety protocols if the executives who are on their multi-million-dollar salaries are right next to the generators. You would ensure that safety occurs then. They're not going to get to have their head office in a cushy job in the middle of the CBD or work from home. They're going to be showing up to the office next to the reactor. A bit of an odd policy, but I think that you would watch safety protocols super tighten if executives had to do that. But again, I do think Australia's missed the boat on nuclear energy, unfortunately, and they didn't want it. The election happened, and Australians didn't want it. Everyday Aussies, the majority didn't want it. Australia should deepen its ties with China. I strongly disagree. Um, it's everyday population of Chinese people. I have no problem with. It's the government, the CCP, and Xi Jinping, essentially a dictator, um, disappearing people, horrible human rights violations in China. We are a trade partner. So if it was deepen just its economic ties, different debate, but we should see China and the government as an adversary. And that doesn't mean we can't be diplomatic, but don't trust them, the data that they're gathering, and the positioning they're taking on in certain areas like Taiwan and the South China Sea, not okay with what the Chinese government are doing, and Australia should not deepen its ties. How much should the Australian government spend to subsidize the cost of electricity for consumers? So again, see, this is it's a right-wing framing of a privatization question because if electricity was a public utility, I think people would still have to pay bills, but it would be sort of a different model where the government isn't having to necessarily subsidize. It could just be cheaper on its own. Like I'd prefer the electricity just to be cheaper then to be a certain price for private companies to make that money, and then the government co- footing the bill. But that said, if we're in the system that we're in, and that's not going to change in the short term, I do think that the government should somewhat more help consumers. And I think that should be scaled. You know, lower income, if you're on a healthcare card or on Centrelink, there should be higher electricity rebates. I know, I think you get them anyway, or some level of them. But to help out with Aussie, especially with the soaring cost of electricity, the government could do more. So, as in principle and the practical nature of how that would work, I do think it should be more. There should be fewer tax breaks on investment properties. I strongly agree. I would caveat, I think we don't want to disincentivize um, people that have worked hard and sacrificed and have one or two investment properties. So, because this is a story, this is what you hear from a lot of people that are on the more pro investment property end is if you know, negative gearing, if you take these things away, it decreases in investment. Or there's the mum and dad investors who have one investment property. I don't know the exact stat. I will go into this. I'll do a whole video on this and we'll look at it. That probably is the majority. And in that case, I'm okay with that. It's that tail end of ultra wealthy again who own like whole apartment buildings or 100 buildings. And I would say even if you have five investment properties, that, you know, they talk about supply as the housing problem. Well, that's part of the problem then, isn't it? If you're hogging the houses, you know, in the game of, my little metaphor is, you know, the game of Monopoly, you win by owning all the property, and the person loses because they can't afford to keep paying the person who owns all the property. The thing with Monopoly, though, is at the end of the game, you get to reset the board and you start on a fair playing field again. In real life, these people are just getting richer and richer and richer over time, and generationally, that's just going to expound. So we're going to have this back to like the serfdom of just a whole bunch of people that are perpetual renters and a whole bunch of people that are just getting wealthier and wealthier. And I don't want that to be the world. Okay, if you want that to be the world, that's let's talk about that. But I strongly agree that once we're talking over two investment properties, like three and beyond, there should be much fewer tax breaks. How much funding should non-government schools receive from the Australian government? Well, again, careful wording. Do we talk about private schools? I can't believe I didn't know this until only a few years ago, but that private schools get more funding from the government per school than a lot of public schools. And I actually think that so how much funding should they receive from the government? I would say much less. And I think they should, or if they want to get that funding, so I want to attach the less funding to, if they want to get that funding, they need to have the word public in their name, because there's this whole private public school. And yes, I was a public school kid, but the private school kids, which is a whole problem with the corporations too, where they take this government money, and but then they don't have to be attached. Like if you're unemployed, you get to be, you know, given this thing like you're on the dole, you're getting entitlements. But a corporation getting subsidies or a private school getting government money, there's no stigma attached to that. So I would make a caveat: you want to get that funding, you want to get public funding, you got to put public in your school's name. How many immigrants should Australia admit? Very broad question and much more subtlety to that. I have sort of changed my opinion, and this is again where I differ from the left. I think it has gotten a bit out of control, and that is something that Labor need to look at. And I think the opinion in Australia has changed. And again, so this is where, you know, my belief about what benefits everyday Aussies or what the majority of Australians want versus what I personally think. Um, I think we need to go look at right now somewhat fewer. I think we need to sort of have a look at a whole range of things about international students, the different kinds of visas, taking on refugees, because I think we could probably do more of that. But in other areas, we like as a whole, if we're looking across everything, and this is a very subtle issue, I do think we need to sort of limit that to make sure that we're taking care of our everyday Aussies that are here first. And then we could look at increasing the immigrant numbers again down the line. But I think we do need to curb that trend a little bit right now. The government should ban the expansion of coal mining operations in Australia. Um, Over time, I strongly agree. Um, but what I'm going to do is, if that means like right now, I somewhat agree, because I recognize that this is a transition. I think down the line, Actually, I will say strongly agree because I think overall we do need to do this. But again, bans, it's all punitive. I want to invest in the clean energy and communicate to the public about the benefits of that, that not just destroying the environment and all of that, but that it's just coal is a limited resource. There's a lot there, but it's going to run out one day, and we need to have something, a backup plan. And there are lots of different options for that. Um, and a lot of this is, the coal mining companies and the huge corporations donating to politicians and being investors and all of the things that are going on behind the scenes in terms of corruption. I want to see politicians much more stronger on this, talking about a transition. How much tax should large corporations pay? If you don't know me by now, I'm going to tell you much more. Um, they get away with a lot of different loopholes, multinationals shifting profits overseas and things like that, licensing fee adjustments to costs and things like that. There's so many different loopholes that they're exploiting. And so as a whole, they need to be paying much more tax. Boats carrying asylum seekers should be turned back. I This again relates to the immigration issue. I'm just going to say somewhat disagree, and then I'll explain that in its own video just to get through this one. But I think there's a more humane way to do that because we don't want what had been happening over the last few decades of so many people dying out at sea. We should, if you can turn them back safely, but we don't want people dying out on sea related to a lot of the trying to turn them back and all that. But I will get to that in its own video. Political parties should commit to running at least as many women candidates as they do men. That's we're getting, they didn't say the word quota there, but we're talking about quotas. I'm not such a fan of quotas. I think it should be merit based, and women should be encouraged and supported to run. But to me, I don't look at a candidate based on their gender. That I don't care about that at all. But that said, women are much less represented. So I guess in principle, I'll say somewhat agree. Wouldn't If it was said as quotas, I wouldn't agree to that. But again, it's just um, I'm close to neutral on that one, but I'll say somewhat agree. Just so I do think there should be more women politicians. But again, I wouldn't vote for politicians just because they're a woman. It would depend on their policies. Australia should set up a Truth and Justice Commission to look into how the government mistreated Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Oh, great. Nice, non-controversial topic there. Look, my opinion with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues is that there was, growing up in, especially in the public system, we did not really get a history of Australia at all. And I went out to a mission and saw this field where we got told there was a huge massacre there, and the energy and the for me, it was a life-changing moment to understand what really happened between the white settlers and the Aboriginal people. It wasn't just like they handed over the land in an agreement. It was much worse than that, and the stolen generations and all the intergenerational trauma that's caused and still causing today. I just think most white Australians are misinformed on that. We don't have the information. I don't even have all the information, but the information I have, you just look up, even just on Wikipedia, the list of people like Aboriginals killed. It just goes on and on and on. And this is all documented from like the 1800s. So it's not even like up for debate. Like basically a genocide happened, and the effects of that are still going on today. And I know it's a very passionate issue for some people because white people don't want to feel bad. Like if we didn't personally do it, we don't want to feel like we need to be punished or held responsible for it. But for reconciliation, looking at this in a positive way, we need to right the wrongs of the past. And so that's why I did. I've got to do another video on The Voice. I voted yes on that because I thought even though it wasn't perfect, it was a step towards true reconciliation and giving the Aboriginal people a voice to have their say on issues that affect them. So in saying that, it would, there's all those things about what would this look like, how would it play out, that I can't be strongly for it because I don't know the details of it, but I do somewhat agree that there needs to be some kind of independent body to look at what happened and to try and right those wrongs, because they haven't, fellow white people, those wrongs have not been righted yet. Um, asylum seekers who arrive by boat should be held in offshore detention centers while their claims are being processed. So the inhumanity, I haven't personally seen them, but I know people that have worked in those detention centers, and just look at them up online. Super inhumane, cruel, um, horrible. So I strongly disagree with that. Australia Day should continue to be celebrated on January 26th. This is again, an Aboriginal issue where it's being called Invasion Day. Again, I know that tradition is a funny word because Australia, in the recent history, has always been on January 26th. So we could say we don't want to change tradition for that, but it is a painful day for a lot of Aboriginal people who that is not a day of celebration. I don't think it's that big of a deal just to move it to January 27th. Um, I don't really think that's a big problem. But again, this issue to me, I am happy to call January 26th Australia Day. I'm happy to call it Invasion Day. It can be, we can have two emotions at once. It can be a day of great celebration and great sadness, and consider all the emotions of our country. So I don't think by definition we should move it. So I am quite neutral on that, to be honest. I'm not, I don't care if it's the 26th or the 27th, or another day. The Australian government should fund a childcare program for every child in Australia. And again, strongly agree. I'm a parent myself, so this does affect me, but I think strong, well-funded childcare is part of that, the social democrat Nordic model. So parents can, on one hand, parents can go out and work and earn an income and be productive, and children can have that high quality support from childcare, so the childcares are properly funded as well. For me, that's an everyone wins. And I know there might be people who aren't parents. They say, "Why are my taxes going to that?" Well, we want a society where children are able to grow and learn in a good environment, and that parents aren't disproportionately affected by having to self-fund that, um, which and they do anyway. I don't know if it should be fully funded, but definitely this is a great policy. Cannabis should be legalized for recreational use. I do strongly agree with that. I think the government has no the health detriments of cannabis are there, but the benefits are far greater. And it's insane that alcohol is legal, but cannabis is not. Cannabis is much less harmful than alcohol. Um, and I don't want to punish. I don't want to ban alcohol. I think we should just legalize recreational weed. I'm going to leave it at that. The Australian government should pay the full cost of family doctor visits. Yes, they should. Healthcare, especially for a GP, should be free. Pretty straightforward one there. How accessible should abortion services be in Australia? Um, Again, I think, well, I'm in a Victorian context. I think they could probably be somewhat more available, but I think just given what I know, I think I'll probably say, um, look, I don't know the exact stats. I could probably look it up now, but I'd be okay to say about the same. But because I don't know the situation, I think it's okay for Victoria, but with other states, if it's more restrictive, I'll just say don't know. Okay, policy. The government should change its tax policies to discourage. Government should change its tax policies to discourage people from using housing as an investment. Yes, I agree with that. Housing is a human right. Um, and I recognize there will be always a portion of renters. Some people don't necessarily want to own homes or other kinds of variations. It's not that people should have to own a home, but I think that seeing property as simply a commodity to be traded and a wealth generating opportunity beyond your own personal home, which of course for most Aussies is their principal source of wealth. Um, Once we get to one or two, I strongly agree that we shouldn't be doing that. People who own more than one property should not receive property tax breaks. If that means their own property, I'm going to somewhat agree that one because I'm okay to let one or two properties have those sort of tax breaks. But then, yeah, it's again, I've said it, don't want to repeat myself, but it's once you're getting into the multiple houses. Oh my gosh. Okay, now we're doing leaders, how competent they are. I'm not going to give anyone a zero because the fact that if you've ever become a politician, you have some level of competence. Look, I'll even give him credit. He became the leader, so I'll give him a two. Albanese, well, I mean, my answer to this was lower, but I mean, you can't argue that he's not a winner right now that he won. I think he's quite boring. Like I don't find him an inspiring leader at all. I think he gets a lot of the issues wrong. I don't know how personally corrupt he might be, but as a representative of the Labour Party, they've got issues, and we'll get into all those. So look, I'd be given like a 5 or a 6, but because he really, really took Labour to a decisive victory a second time around, he's got to get a 7. Adam Band, I've completely changed my. I never really rated Adam Band that high anyway. But look, he lost his own seat. He took the Greens in the wrong direction. He has a lot to answer for that. I'd love to have him on my pod on this show. But yeah, he's a 2 as well. Look, Pauline Hanson's a funny one because even though you might disagree with their ideas, and I disagree with a lot of them, I love her, talking about the economic issues for farmers because farmers do get really screwed in Australia by the corporations, Coles and Woolies and all that. Um, One Nation is still on the ballot, like all over Australia. We had a One Nation candidate in Victoria while she's a Queensland senator, and so in a way, she's probably got some level of competence that needs to be recognised. So I'll give her a 3. Trustworthy Peter Dutton. I've got to go 0 for that. I do not trust him one bit. Albanese. Look, I think one thing to call him dishonest is a bit of a stretch. Like to call him untrustworthy. But again, he just seems to waver on a few things. Like when watching the debates, you sort of can tell he's not fully saying what he believes. And to me, that's a level of trustworthy. I want to know exactly what you believe, even if it's unpopular, as I'm doing now. So he's going to get a 5. Adam Band, look, the thing with Adam Band is even though um, he demonstrated a level of incompetence and took the Greens in the wrong direction, I don't doubt his trustworthiness. I think he does. We got the same shirt. He still truly believes what he says, but because he's a politician, he instantly loses 2 points. So he'll get an 8. Pauline Hanson again, too. She um, says what she believes. Like you can't really doubt that either. So um, I do wish you'd focus on more of the economic stuff and the less just overt racism and anti-immigration. Even though there might be some valid points there in terms of some of those specific policies. So she'll get a 7. All right, let's quicken this up, Nathan. If the Australian federal election were held today, which of the following preferences would you vote for? Um, can I say independent? Yeah. Thinking about your preference for the House of Representatives, which of the two major parties will you rank higher? So you don't know. In the last federal election for the lower house, the House of Representatives, which of the following did you vote for? So I voted for the Greens. I'm going to do a whole series on that, 2-part video. Australian federal election for the upper house, the Senate were held today. Which of the following would you vote for as your first preference? Independent. In the last federal election, I think I voted for legalized cannabis. What is my sex? Male. How would I swear my gender? Born in 1992. Master's degree. Self-employed. I would say Christian. I'm going to say other Christian. I'm kind of non-denominational. Yes, I'm a citizen. Yes, I was born in Australia, not Aboriginal. Uh, Ethnic, cultural. I would say English. We got some Scottish too, but let's just keep it simple. How many people live in my household? We got 3. Under 15, we got 1. My income. In politics, some people talk of left and right. Where would you place yourself on the scale? So this is the fun part. So 0 is left. So left a lower number. So yeah, the ABC is really right wing framed, aren't they? And 10 is right wing. So yeah, I'm not a 5 I would consider then like a centrist, which I'm not a centrist. I don't want to take the average of both ideas and compromise like that. I think some ideas are good and some ideas are bad. Um, but yeah, I'll go like a 4 on the left right spectrum. I'm closer to the left than the right. In the past 12 months, have you belonged to any of the following? Oh, okay, below. Yeah. I just ticked that one, but there's a few others. But let's just get to cost of living. We'll say no to that one. Let's have a look at the results. Yeah, and this is pretty. I landed pretty much exactly where um, I did last time, as you can see here. And I'd love you to do this too, and let me know where you landed. That I'm somewhere between. I see if you look at the parties, I don't fit with any party. Okay, I guess you could say I'm closer to Labour, but I'm a bit more economically left. I think that's fair to say with the belief in social democratic Nordic model policies where the government should help raise the floor on lower people. But I'm, as you can see, on the conservative progressive side. I guess I'm more progressive, but I'm not far out progressive like the Greens. So I also dispute where Labour is positioned because they are. You'd have to ask Labour people, but they're probably a little bit more centre or the right on the economic issues, especially now. Some of the things they're doing with um, different policies. Uh, you could almost argue because there is a whole right fraction of Labour, so to put Labour on the left is a bit odd. But there you go. I'm nowhere near the Liberal Party or One Nation, as you can see there. That said, look, this is what I find really important as well. The Australia, like, so clearly I am closer to the Greens on 79% of things. Um, but I still have disagreements with every party, and this is the issue, isn't it? That there is um, no one party that I align with. And with the Greens, I think it used to be in previous elections I was up to 95%, but I cannot get on board with some of the way they've handled things. So as you can see, I've drifted away from them. I wouldn't say I'm drifting towards Labor, um, but that's the whole purpose of this podcast being feeling like I've been politically homeless. I'm in this sort of zone where no real party represents me. So this was a video on what I believe. You've just seen me outline all the different political issues, and I will likely do videos on each of those issues individually. And those will be the issues that I'm going to bring up and talk about with different people, everyday Aussies that I talk to in my journeys. And so I really appreciate you watching the video. Please like, uh, comment, and subscribe on whatever channel, video, or podcast you're listening to. And I'm again, Nathan. This is the Rightist Leftist, the podcast for the politically homeless. And let's keep this conversation going.